Yeah, and welcome to our first or our second, actually, Friends of Virginia MRC initial interest meeting. I'm the state coordinator for the MRC, and I'm excited to share with you my vision for a new companion organization that will operate separately from, but in support of the Virginia MRC and our 26 MRC units. This new initiative builds on the early efforts and achievements of the Friends of Southwest Virginia MRC, which was started several years ago in support of the Southwest Virginia MRC unit. And with me today, I've got Pat Minen from the Southwest Virginia MRC to talk a little bit about how that organization has helped his unit. We'll get to him later in the presentation. Um, Sorry for flipping slides on you. Um, yeah, and so while we're stealing all of their ideas and lessons learned, this organization will be separate from that organization and will have a statewide focus. We're not going to replace or get rid of the Friends of Southwest Virginia MRC. So for those of you who might be board members or prior board members of Southwest Virginia MRC friends, don't worry, this is not going to like take your organization away. We're just gonna borrow from your lessons learned. But the important thing for everyone else to know is that a lot of hard work has already been done for us, which will make this project very easy to implement. So why are we creating a new 501c3 organization called Friends of Virginia MRC? And the answer is to do these 5 things that you see on our slide. And we'll cover these things in our next several slides in more detail. For advocating as a state agency, the Virginia Department of Health and the Virginia MRC, we're restricted from lobbying federal government officials at the federal, state, and local levels. And private nonprofit organizations have fewer restrictions in that regard. And so this gives you guys more opportunities to advocate, educate, lobby, and tell the MRC story to the people that matter to our program. In addition to advising outside organizations and stakeholders, really value the feedback that MRC volunteers and the perspective and unique ideas that volunteers have. And this organization would actually provide a vehicle for you guys to provide that, advice and feedback to us in a meaningful way. And along with that, you guys can help strategize. So, strategy is a little bit more than just providing advice. It's developing a plan to move forward. And that plan could have, objectives and goals with the mindset of taking our program to a new level. So those are all things that I think this organization can do. But a big one that I'll talk about next, raising money. So as a state entity, the Virginia MRC is somewhat limited in our ability to accept private donations. We do get a lot of federal grant money. And our biggest funding source is the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Program grant. And in recent years, we've had the MRC Strong grant, we've had the Public Health Infrastructure grant, we've had COVID funds that have all helped build our program. But a lot of those funding sources are drying up or going away, and future funding is not guaranteed. Additionally, there's other funding opportunities that have been out there for years that we haven't been able to take advantage of because those funding opportunities were limited to nonprofit organizations, and we don't qualify as a nonprofit right now as the Virginia MRC. Even though we don't make a profit, we're not set up as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So these are all things that a Friends of Virginia 501c3 organization can do. You can also do your own fundraisers, which we're not specifically allowed to do as a state agency. And then when it comes to actually spending the money, we as a government agency, we run into certain problems and restrictions when it comes to spending money. So we would love to provide everyone in the MRC with a t-shirt, a hat, uniform, maybe even a jacket for the winter time, polo shirt for, certain types of occasions would be nice. However, a lot of our grant funds now used to not be so restricted, but lately a lot more restrictive about, buying t-shirts for our volunteers. And as you know, you've seen these pictures that I've shown in the last several slides. The t-shirts with the MRC logo make our volunteers a lot more visible in the community. They help with recruitment. They help with morale of the unit. It helps with, when they're working on a site, for our staff in VDH to know who our volunteers are and where they are in the field. And so they're really important. And this has been really a point of frustration, not being able to purchase these items. Supplies and equipment, most of the time we can purchase supplies and equipment with grants, but it has to follow, agency procurement guidelines. And sometimes there's things that we'd like to have that we can't get in those categories. Food and beverages for training and celebration events, that's another area where we struggle a lot. So we can provide a lunch if we're doing an 8-hour training day, but just doing a celebration dinner, a lot of times we have to do those as potlucks, or sometimes even some of our MRC unit coordinators just purchase those out of pocket. And these are things where, again, an outside organization could do these things without as much red tape and without as many rules. And then promotional items. So we'd love to be able to give away, keychains, pens, buttons and other things that would promote our program when we're doing tabling events, when we're doing recruitment events. But a lot of our grant money restricts us from buying these as well. And so, ultimately the Friends of Virginia MRC will boost the credibility of the MRC program in Virginia, provide additional funding opportunities, provide opportunities for collaboration. And we think this will ultimately to increase volunteer recruitment and improve volunteer experience. When we do establish an organization, some people might wonder what that organization might look like. And the reason it says sample across the front of the slide is that it's really up to the board itself once it's formed. As I mentioned, this will be a separate organization from Virginia MRC. And so the board will need to structure itself the way that it makes sense for them to do so. And I don't want to be too prescriptive in doing this, but this is based on the organization chart of the Friends of Southwest Virginia MRC, with a few modifications, with the understanding that we're a statewide organization versus they're a local. But I envision having a chair of the board, and the chair of the board will serve as, basically the leader of the organization, will call the meetings and lead the meetings, provide the tie-breaking vote. Vice chair supports the chair, fills in during the chair's absence. Treasurer manages the money for the organization. Secretary records meeting minutes, sends out the meeting minutes and agendas. Regional representatives would represent different areas of the state, and then at-large or ad hoc members would also be appointed by the board as needed. So for instance, if you decide to set up some ad hoc committees, those ad hoc committee chairs could then be board members while those committees are in existence. And then as the state MRC coordinator, I would be what's called an ex officio member, and that I would attend all the board meetings. I'd provide information and updates regarding the Virginia MRC program, maybe describe some of our needs or challenges, but ultimately would not be a voting member. And I saw a question in the chat, is this a requirement that we set up the organization this way? No, this is basically, I've taken what's worked in Friends of Southwest Virginia MRC and have basically duplicated that structure. But the next step, as we'll see in a couple slides, is to set up a founding board, which will really define what these positions are and what they do, and then elect the board members to those positions. I mentioned, potential ad hoc committees. Again, this would be up to the board to establish and disestablish as needed. And so these are some good examples of committees that they might want to establish. And with that, I'm going to turn it over for just a minute to Pat Minen to give us a little bit of testimony of Friends of Southwest Virginia MRC and how they've worked for them. Pat is the Southwest Virginia MRC coordinator. So Pat, over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone. As Mike said, I'm the unit coordinator for Southwest Virginia, and we love the Friends of Southwest Virginia. My predecessor, Christina Morris, was the unit coordinator for 20 years, and she set up the Friends of the MRC about 6 years ago. And as Mike has mentioned, having a nonprofit allows us to purchase things that VDH would not allow us to purchase. Our group purchases water and food for volunteers, our unit t-shirts, supplies, hats, vests. We purchase promotional items every year. I don't know if you can see this glow stick, but we wanted to give out something related to emergency preparedness when we go to health fairs. So we have our MRC name printed on there and our webs and the unit website so people can follow up with us later. We also give out two $500 scholarships every year to members of our unit who are studying in a healthcare related field. And we raise money each year by selling parking at the Bristol Rhythm and Roots Festival that's held every September. Usually we raise about $2,000 for that, and then we can use that money, of course, throughout the year. And we've also applied for and received grants from community foundations in the past to use for equipment or the t-shirts that we need for our volunteers. So I think it would be great for the state to have a Friends of the MRC. Mike, back to you.
Great, thank you, Pat. Yeah, so yeah, and we'll have time for questions at the end, and Pat will stick around in case anybody's got some additional questions for him. I'm going to go ahead and jump through. There's just a few more slides, and then we'll talk about next steps. So yeah, so next steps, as I mentioned, first step is we're going to create a founding board. So this is just going to be kind of an ad hoc committee. If anybody who wants to be in our founding board, we're going to have a sign up sheet that I'm going to put in the chat, a link for you guys to sign up if you're interested in being a founding board member. But their job is basically to meet, 2 to 3 times to elect officers. And then the board would then take over. So there would be an executive board to approve a charter and bylaws. And because we've got a lot of this work done, I've got a draft charter and bylaws for them to consider. However long it takes them to review those and edit those and change them to their liking, maybe 1 month, it might be a couple months, I'm not sure. And then they'll establish a meeting schedule. At some point, they'll need to open a banking account, which means we'll need some money donated up front just to open an account, not very much. And then apply for the 501c3 status. And that application does cost a little bit of money. So again, we'll need a little bit of startup capital for that. But it should be a fairly straightforward process because, like I said, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're following something that's already been done and has worked well. And so this is kind of a rough implementation timeline. Again, nobody's forced to stick to this. This is just kind of what I think it could take to get it done. Oh, excuse me. And then that's it. So we're, into the questions and comments slide.